All right, well, good morning. Jarrod Bleijie, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Well, it's another day in Queensland and a high-profile citizen has come out questioning how the government is arranging the governance arrangements with respect to delivery of the 2032 Brisbane Olympic infrastructure. We have been calling on the government for transparency on this matter for weeks now. We've asked the government for their costings, they've refused to release them. We've asked the government to release the plans for the Gabba redevelopment and they've refused to release them. Whilst the Premier is focused on building a monument to herself, Queenslanders are focused on whether they can afford milk for the week. And this is how serious this issue has become now, as the Premier is so focused on taking control of delivery of all the infrastructure and delivery of the Olympics 2032 that she is forgetting her other job. And her other job is Queenslanders. Yes, she is the Premier for the Olympics, but she is also Premier for all of Queensland. And she is so focused on control and building monuments to herself, she is forgetting about the other issues. The other issues like costs of living, huge pressures on Queenslanders at the moment on costs of living, mortgage rates, fuel, groceries. We see today land valuations, which will push up rates. That should be the focus of the Premier. The focus of the Premier should be on the health crisis, the crime crisis, and yet she only has one priority, and that is all about Games glory. That is all Premier Palaszczuk is focused on. What is in it for her in terms of the Olympic Games glory? And it's a sad reflection on where we have come to in Queensland government in its third term now, that the Premier is more focused on building a monument to herself, the billions of dollars in budget blowouts. The only risk to the Olympics is Anastasia Palaszczuk and her budget blowouts. The only risk to the Olympics is Anastasia Palaszczuk's ego that she cannot let go of control over any of this. That's why we have said it is so important to have an independent delivery authority from government looking and delivering and planning all the infrastructure with respect to the Olympics. We've got the Gabba that has blown out from $1 billion to $2.7 billion, 170% blowout. Before, Queenslanders could even see plans, any assessments, there was no business case, and as the Auditor General said, all he knew about it was on a press release. This is how the government are planning the Olympics. It is on the back of an envelope, they are scratching some figures down, issuing a press release, and then we see 170% blowout in the Gabba. So we've gone from $1 billion to $2.7 billion. We spent all week asking the government in Parliament last week to detail their costings, their plans, where they're getting the facts and figures from, and they buckled at every opportunity. We have asked the government to set up an independent delivery authority from government. They have refused, and it is clear why they have refused. They've brought it all in-house so the Premier can make all these decisions. The Premier of the state should be making decisions on costs of living, how to heal the health crisis, how to protect victims and give victims of crime more support, how to make offenders accountable and have consequences for their actions. She should not solely be focused on wrestling control of the 2032 Olympic Games. And as I said, the greatest danger to the Olympic Games is Anastasia Palaszczuk and the decision that she has made to wrestle all control of the Olympic Games. They've already blown the budget before they've commenced. It's clear they've blown the budget. There's no transparency, there's no accountability, and there is no explanation to Queenslanders who are paying for the Olympic Games. Let's not forget about this. This is not monopoly money. This is not Anastasia's money. This is Queensland taxpayers' money. It is their money, and there has been no explanation as to the expenditure and the budget blowouts. That's why we keep repeating ourselves that it is so important to have an independent delivery authority separate to government that can plan, budget, and deliver the important infrastructure for the 2032 Olympic Games. And as our leader said yesterday, and I'll finish on this before I take questions, we have made it abundantly clear there will be and has to be a world-class Gabba Olympic facility. But there has to be transparency, openness and accountability around the budgeting and the decisions being made by this Premier. Over to you.
Speaking of land tax, land valuations have skyrocketed across the state, and that means that some homeowners will be getting their first land tax bill. What do you think that will mean to them, especially given the impact on rates?
Well, look, I've read the reports this morning that some 800,000 Queenslanders last Friday would have received their land valuations, and some would be receiving them for the very first time. This is another cost of living pressure. Queenslanders are under severe pressure at the moment with cost of living expenses. We do have Queenslanders at the moment now working out whether they can afford to put fuel in the car, food on the table, pay their rent or pay their mortgage. We have a high statistics of Queenslanders now that are delayed and behind in their mortgage payments. The last thing we need now is more cost of living pressures on Queenslanders, and that is exactly what these land tax evaluations of land will do, because we've seen that once the Valuer General of Queensland puts out the land valuations, councils use that for rating, and rates will go up under these valuations. I saw in some aspects there were some 11% rises. In Noosa there was 62% rises. So these will have huge consequences for people. And again, I see the government, what are they doing about it? Nothing. They said they're going to talk about it or look at it in their budget they hand down in June, July this year. Again, they don't care. They are not focused on the issues that Queenslanders are talking about. They're not focused on health, law and order, or costs of living. They are purely focused on the Olympic Games glory for the Premier. And that is why I say again, the Premier needs to stop this nonsense. She needs to drop the ego for the Olympics, let independent, the best of the best people in the world plan and deliver the infrastructure, and she needs to concentrate on these things like cost of living pressures. They are not going to get any better in the next 12 months. In fact, they are going to get worse. Queenslanders will be under more pressure than they are today, and I'm not seeing the government put enough focus or energy with respect to these issues. No, I haven't. I've seen his comments today, and I suspect this will be one of many people that will start questioning the expenditure on the Games. And the comments that he made today in the media that I see, he's particularly referencing the delivery of the infrastructure and how that's going to be, and questioning why the government have decided to bring it all in-house. We know why they've brought it all in-house, and I do not accept for a moment when Anastasia Palaszczuk says that they've had a Deloitte report they've been working on for a year. The reality is, like every Olympics that have gone, and the ones that are planned in the future, before the 2032 Queensland Brisbane Olympics, that there's been independent delivery authorities, and it gets rid of the politics, it gets rid of the ego of politicians serving on boards. It is just the best of the best people in the room planning what's needed, what's required, not only in Brisbane, but right around Queensland. The other issue, Josh, on that question is that if you don't have this independent delivery authority, and the decisions are all being made by the Premier, which they will be now, Premier Palaszczuk will make every decision without consultation with our community on all of these matters. Well, the Sunshine Coast won't get our rail. The Sunshine Coast for rail from Biwa to Caloundra to Kuana to Maroochydore won't happen. All they have announced is stadium money, monuments to the Premier that she thinks she will be able to cut ribbons for in 2032. Like, for goodness sake, it should not be about the politicians. It should not be about the Premier. But she is so focused on the glory. She is so focused on the red carpet. She is so focused on photo opportunities for herself and her team. She is forgetting the big picture. The big picture is, this is Olympics about Queensland. It is not about Anastasia Palaszczuk. I feel the sun on my back now, heating up. All good? All right. Sorry, Josh.
Stephen Miles says this model will be reviewed within 2 years, though, so it could change after that.
Well, if I haven't seen Stephen Miles say that, but if he has said that, then that is an admission that they may not have got the model right. The reality is we are over 2 years since the announcement was made that Brisbane was going to host the 2032 Olympics. And if you've already got the Deputy Premier saying that the model's going to be reviewed in another 2 years' time, well, that runway that they keep talking about, that long runway, is quickly shriveling up, and the runway is getting shorter and shorter. The reality is that they have spent the last 12 months working out a way that they can announce that they don't have an independent delivery authority and they can bring it all in-house, and that is purely so the Premier can make the decisions. It should not be about the Premier making decisions. It's got to be about the future. It's got to be about the legacy. It's got to be about more than stadiums. And I don't accept for a fact when the Premier announced $1 billion upgrade to the Gabba has now blown out to 170%, $2.7 billion without explanation. If you have an independent delivery authority, you can hold them accountable. Now the Premier says, oh well, Parliament will hold us accountable. Well, last week we moved a motion in Parliament that actually said, Premier, it was demanding the government table the costings of the original $1 billion Gabba plan. And what did they do? They amended the motion and did it all about how fantastic the Olympics are going to be without actually the economic methodology and costings around it. So we are going to keep the pressure on the government to set up this body, and we absolutely are committed to setting up this independent body where we have the best of the best planning and delivering this infrastructure and depoliticise it from the Premier's office, because that is all it has become now about what the Premier thinks is in her interest, not in the interest of Queensland or the athletes.
Who should be on the authority?
Well, that is what I would say, without mentioning names, is the best of the best. So I don't have a name, I don't have a list of names that I would put on the body. What I'm saying is the government should have been recruiting for the best of the best around the world.
But who should it be made up of?
Right, okay. It should be made up of people that have built stadiums before. It should be made up of people that have Olympic experience and who have delivered successful Olympic Games. They're the types of people that should be planning this. Now, the Premier's chairing her own little internal body. And interestingly, when she announced this internal body, it's essentially a replica of the organising committee. It's not the organising committee's role to be delivering the infrastructure, but the body that she has set up internally in her own office essentially is the same body. I'm saying it should be a mixture of people with experience in delivering infrastructure on time and on budget. And this government does not have a good track record of delivering infrastructure on time and on budget. Project after project we are seeing blow out. This did surprise me, the Gabba, how early it's blown out before anything was actually released on it, 170% increase. That's a gold record even for this bad Labor government.
Just on rent prices, tenants in more than 11 suburbs are paying up to $430 a week, more than what they were 12 months ago. What should the government be doing in the short and medium term to address the continuous rental price spike?
Well, again, whether it's rent, mortgage stress, fuel, groceries, the government have not been doing anything on this front. Now, particularly with the rental issue, that's a number of issues. One, rent skyrocketed because of market and supply, demand and supply issues. During COVID, we saw a huge influx to people to Queensland, not enough housing stock. The government have not been releasing enough land. Now, last week in Parliament, again, we raised the issue of housing, and we said to the government that you've had actually a decrease in lot approvals under this government's watch in the last 8 years. And the Premier's response to that was, that's a council issue. But yet we have a Queensland State Government Housing Minister and we have a Queensland State Government Infrastructure and Planning Minister, which works with council on lot approvals. Aura in Caloundra, for instance, is a state government approved development site. Over 50,000 residents will be living there in the next 25 years. That's a state government responsibility. That's not a council. Sippy Downs, Chancellor Park, they also had state government priority development infrastructure areas where they put all these people. So there has not been enough land released. Now that is cold comfort for a lot of renters that are seeing these skyrocketing rental increases at the moment. But what we need to do is have more supply, so particularly first home buyers can can get into the market, because a lot of the times the mortgage payments in the last couple of years were less than the rent they were going to pay. So it is a number of issues the government have got to look at, but the government have done a housing summit, and other than granny flats, I don't really know what they have announced to assist these issues.
And should measures be brought in to regulate what some would consider price gouging in the rental market?
Well, it's very difficult in that regard because you are in a private rental market. I think the government's responsibility has to be to make sure, working with councils, that there is enough land released to keep the supply issues up with the demand issues, because I think that then would naturally reflect on a rental market. But because people haven't been able to buy homes, and they haven't been able to get land release, they haven't been able to build homes, then you are seeing the rental demand increase, therefore landlords are putting the rent up. So I think it actually stems back to the state government housing and infrastructure and planning. They could actually do a lot in the early space that would lead to a reduction in the rental, or not the gouging that we are seeing. I would also say that with gouging, sometimes the rental market is great for landlords and sometimes it's great for tenants. And I think that the landlords that have been respectful to tenants and looking at the tenants' availability to pay rent, particularly if they're being good tenants, I think they will be those good landlords will be rewarded in the future, because the market will turn when there's more land release, and we've got to see that.
Just on island resorts,
Yes.
inquiry findings suggest that the embattled island resorts should have leases cancelled. Should government instead be doing more to help?
Well, we're at 8 years now of the Palaszczuk government, and David Crisafulli, our leader, has been talking about a 20-year vision for tourism for years now. And the government, I've seen the report recommendations, the government are currently considering those report recommendations. But in a 20-year strategy, you've got to look in the first 10 years that we've announced of infrastructure. And these islands, these idyllic islands, have been sitting there, some going to absolute waste. And the state have had no proactive measures to actually work out how we can re-engage, get these idyllic islands back going, the resorts going again, getting international tourism, particularly looking at all the people going to be coming to Queensland for the 2032 Olympics. And we see it, the LNP sees it as a huge opportunity, particularly for the 2032 Olympics, where regional communities with islands can particularly benefit from the influx of people coming to Queensland, that they may not feel as supportive of the Olympics with Gabba redevelopments and so forth, but if we can build tourism in their areas. So absolutely, the government have got to be looking at some form of strategy, because at the moment we don't know what the Labor government strategy is for these islands or for tourism. We're saying, though, in the LNP side of things, we have announced a 20-year vision and strategy for tourism, and that absolutely includes these islands. We have to utilise these islands, talk to the owners, and if there are leasing issues where these long-term leases have had no ability for the government as the lessor to say to the lessee, these big companies, that you've got to keep the island maintained, you've got to keep the economic activity and tourist activity growing on those areas, we will absolutely be doing that. That's part of our strategy, and unfortunately Queenslanders don't know what the current Labor government strategy is because they haven't got one. Yeah, I stood with David Crisafulli yesterday, our leader of the LNP, when he was asked about this, and it's Darcy and Chloe's death for all Queenslanders is just the most traumatic thing I've seen. We'd love to say that we've not seen it before, but we have. Mason Jet Lee, let down by the government, let down by the Department of Child Safety. I saw reports today that the department and Minister Leanne Leonard saying it's not about resourcing, and yet her own child safety department whistleblowers are saying it is about resourcing. And for a minister to absolutely deflect that as an issue and resourcing that there's the child safety department workers, the child safety workers are actually saying that they have so many, the caseload is unbearable. We're hearing it across Queensland as our Shadow Minister Amanda Cam talks to these brave people working as hard as they can. But there has been systemic failures. The government promised that they were going to implement recommendations and this would not happen again since Mason Jet Li. And then we've got young Darcy and Chloe who should be with us today. They should be in the arms of their father today, and they're not because, again, of systemic failings. The Minister for Child Safety stood out here yesterday, just a few metres away from where I am today, and again said the government are going to look at the recommendations. Like, for goodness sake, when does the government stop looking at recommendations and implement change to save children's lives? Kids are being killed in Queensland because of systemic failures in the Department of Child Safety. And the best this government can offer us is they're always looking at change. It shouldn't have happened. There should have been change. The systemic issues should have been fixed since Mason Jet Li. Well, you look at the child safety, feel the sun coming in again. You look at the child safety family report that was tabled yesterday. Now, the government didn't table the full report. We've not seen the full report. They had the Commissioner talking yesterday about some of those issues, but again, it's the same issues we've heard before. It's the same excuses we've heard before. And what I'm perplexed about is the government saying that it's not a resourcing issue when child safety officers are telling us their caseload is unworkable and unbearable. And I acknowledge that the child safety workers, you've got to be a very special person to work in child safety and see what they see on a daily basis, and what would be unthinkable for many Queenslanders, how children are being treated by their own flesh and blood. You just can't believe it actually happens in Queensland, but it is. We've seen it before. So what I would love to see is a commitment from the Minister, rather than platitudes and all the same stuff that Di Farmer gave when she was the Minister, then Shannon Fentiman gave when she was the Minister, and now Leanne Leonard's the Minister. It is the same excuses every Minister, Di Farmer, Shannon Fentiman, and now Leanne Leonard have said. All they're doing is shuffling the ministers. They're not addressing issues that Queensland kids need addressed. If they address some of these issues, like the resourcing, kids will be saved in Queensland. On what, sorry? Yeah, haven't seen that, so I'm not probably not able to comment because I'm not sure what the effect or the cause effect was of that, or how that would benefit in those. Oh, right, okay. In terms of not child safety related though. Oh, sorry, different issue. Right, okay. Yes, well, we've had advice from Queensland Parliament, the Clerk of the Parliament, with respect to that issue as well. And I would think the majority of MPs now, if they are operating those accounts, as I do, it's on our separate phones because of those security and safety measures, yes. Okay, thanks everyone. Back in the sun.